Okay, folks, I'm Mike Bartica, and this is the latest installment of The Creeping Rainbow in Comics. We're going to be talking about how DC put Superman on the map. Now, we are going to be exploring some pretty sketchy and dangerous territory today, and I want to make some preconditions on anybody who is watching this video because I want to be very, very clear about what my intentions are and what my intentions are not. So, number one, no, Superman is not a minor attracted person. That's what the M.A.P in M.A.P stands for, also synonymous with pedophile. Number two, I assume it has never been the intention of anyone mentioned in this video to portray him or any other fictional character as such. Okay, so nobody I'm going to mention has ever intended to portray a fictional character, a comic book character, as a pedophile. Number three, I can't read minds, so I can't say for sure what goes on in any creator's head. I can only speculate. I cannot think that I know for certain what any creator was thinking on any given day that he decided, I think I'm going to write this or draw this, etc., etc. I don't know these things, but, I can make some guesses. But when in doubt, number four, assume the best of intentions. I'm not trying to turn this into a witch hunt. I'm not trying to turn this into I want you to think really badly about this person. And last but not least, never forget that coincidences do happen. If there seems to be a set of circumstances that seem to be, a little bit too good to not imply what it is that they're implying, just keep in mind that sometimes a coincidence is just a coincidence. So, having said all that, we're going to be looking at the work of comic book creator John Byrne. He's one of my favorite writers and favorite artists in all of comic bookdom. So, I want you to remind yourself of the preconditions here, because when I'm through with this, you might be tempted to think some bad things about John Byrne, and I'm not trying to turn you in that direction. Let's just deal with what it is I saw and what observations I have to make about that. So John Byrne's career is long and storied. He, of course, was famously paired with Chris Claremont on the X-Men and really pretty much reinvented that particular series into something that we all know and love today. He moved on from X-Men to Fantastic Four, and this is where he really shined. I have this particular comic book, which is the first of his Fantastic Four run, signed by him, and I tell you what, I read the hell out of that comic. And if you have a chance to go and pick up his Fantastic Four omnibus, oh my God, that is the best set of Fantastic Four comics you will probably ever find out there, including those written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby. I had the opportunity at Comic-Con once to tell John Byrne that he is the best Fantastic Four creator that there has ever been, and I still believe that to this day. He then moved on from Marvel to DC, took over Superman after Crisis on Infinite Earths, and basically reinvented Superman for a new generation in the 6-issue miniseries The Man of Steel. He also had a run on Wonder Woman before leaving DC and doing his own creator-owned stuff in John Byrne's Next Men. And lately, and I think this is the latest he's been working in the comic book field, he's been doing Star Trek properties. So he's still out there, still kicking, still working, and good for him. And what I want to take you through here is the fact that in John Byrne's work, he's never really been afraid to insert sex into comics. Famously in Fantastic Four, number 254, when the Fantastic Four were exploring the negative zone, you had an interlude scene between Reed Richards and his wife, Susan Richards, the happily married couple of the Fantastic Four. And in this scene, Reed and Sue are talking about some energy readings that he's picked up that have never been previously encountered in the negative zone, and he's saying this could prove the most exciting find of our explorations. She replies, "Well, I'm just glad you didn't find it all so pressing you couldn't afford a few minutes for your wife." "Always, my darling. Never doubt that you're the most important." And then they're interrupted. But you could also see from the backlessness of Sue drawn there that basically we're looking at a post-coital scene. This was later confirmed in Fantastic Four 257 when Ben Grimm is informed that he's going to be an uncle again. They've already had their first child, Franklin, and now they're expecting a second child. And he even says, "You scamps, looks like more than just scientific exploration was going on while we was in the negative zone." So, and then there's the requisite blushing on Sue's part. So, sex is something that he's inserted into the Fantastic Four here and there along the way, including when, after a while, he had the Thing go off to the Secret Wars world, and when he returned, found out that Johnny Storm had been hooking up with Alicia. And there's Alicia in her bathrobe, kind of confirming that, yep, they were in bed together. Now, later on, you started getting into Burns started delving into the beginnings of Reed Richards and Susan Storm's relationship. And this is where things can kind of get into a little bit of sketchy territory because there is a considerable age difference between Reed and Sue. Reed is about, I want to say about 7 or 8 years older than Sue Storm. And so Sue, when she's reminiscing with Reed in this flashback sequence, she says, "It seems like only yesterday I was an impulsive little girl with a giant crush on a certain college senior I knew." And Reed says, "I must admit you were a terrific embarrassment back then. Ben used to," and then they cut to the next panel where they run into some alien spaceship and it interrupts the narrative flow here. But basically, she was a little girl at the time, a minor, in fact, and Reed, being a college senior at the age of, around 22, that would put them at about 14 and 22 at the time that they're describing here. However, you will note that Reed says Ben used to, and refers to her as a terrific embarrassment back then. In other words, that was an uncomfortable situation for him to be the object of such adoration from such a young girl. But it wasn't something that they kept secret from anybody. Ben, who is the Thing, Ben Grimm, knew about her adoration for him and probably teased him about it mercilessly. Later on, in Fantastic Four number 291, we find that Reed and Sue actually met a couple years earlier from what she's describing when she was 12 years old and he was about 18 or 19. So it says here, suddenly she is once again 12 years old and meeting for the first time the shy, bookish college freshman who has taken a room at her aunt's Manhattan boarding house. She feels once again the unmistakable pangs of first love, a love that will burn true and sure through all the years that follow. So Sue Storm actually met Reed Richards when she was 12 and crushed on him right away. Now he there is looking kind of uncomfortable, like, oh my gosh, what is this kid, looking at me like that for? And we just assume that, that's the normal reaction, that he doesn't actually experience any attraction for her. I mean, for heaven's sake, she's a kid. Now, later on in 2013, Matt, if I'm not mistaken, it's Matt Hawkins and Mark Bagley retold the first meeting between Sue and Reed. And in that first meeting, Reed says, "I loved you from the moment I saw you." But if you look at Sue Storm in the picture here, her age has been retconned very, very extensively higher than what it was. This is no 12-year-old girl we're looking at. This is more of somebody who's on par with his own age. So basically, this is love at first sight as far as Reed is concerned for him and not necessarily for her. Whereas previously in the John Byrne interpretation of that, it was Sue Storm who had love at first sight for Reed at a very, very early age. Now we have Reed experiencing love at first sight for Sue Storm. And this difference that is recorded here was so noticeable to certain comic book readers that Marvel editor and senior vice president Tom Brevoort had to address it in the letter column and say, while it's always our intention to respect the continuity in the past, especially with so many stories told over such a long period of time, there are going to be instances where what worked in 1985 or 75 or 65 doesn't work as well in 2013. Looking back on that story you referenced, which is obviously the John Byrne tale, That sequence struck us, the both of us, in 21st century terms as being more than a little bit creepy. So we made a conscious decision to modify and update it somewhat, keeping the essence of the situation the same. Reed meets Sue while he's in college and boarding at Sue's aunt's house, but discarding the inappropriateness of a college age man eyeing a 12-year-old girl. Now, I want you to note something really quick is that Tom Brevoort has totally misinterpreted the scene that John Byrne drew. He did not by any means depict a college age man eyeing a 12-year-old girl. It was the other way around. The only reason that Tom is looking at John Byrne's work in that way is because he's got Matt Hawkins' work in front of him, in which Reed is eyeing Sue from the beginning, when Reed is, 22 and Sue is 18 here, say. Now, it's only if you're looking at John Byrne's work through the lens of Hawkins' reinterpretation of that you would ever think that Reed is eyeing Sue in a way that he shouldn't. And likewise, like I said, this is not something that there are. This is something that Sue herself refers on as having a crush on him and not the other way around, because he says that she was a terrific embarrassment and this was something that Ben knew about and probably teased him about. So it was totally unfair of Tom Brevoort to refer to Byrne's work in that way. Moreover, I love the fact where he says, this was a story written back in 1985 or 75 or 65, and it doesn't work as well in 2013. Well, guess what? You don't even have to go back that far to have that particular kind of age gap shoved in our face as legitimate romance. Anybody remember Star Wars? Everybody remember how old Anakin Skywalker was when he first met Padme Amidala, who would later become his wife? There was kind of a considerable age difference there from the point in 1998 when he asked her, "Are you an angel?" And then later on, when courting her, said famously, "I don't like sand." We've already seen this kind of age difference, and this was back in 2002. So I mean, it's just terrible the way that Brevoort put John Byrne's work in a sketchy light there. That was not called for. Now, that being said, John Byrne did. Oh, by the way, let me just divert for a moment. Here's something else that was recently retconned, and it bothers the living crap out of me. We'll see in John Byrne's Fantastic Four 245 that in an interview with Barbara Walker, who is a Barbara Walters type, excuse me, she basically identifies herself as Susan Richards of the Fantastic Four, not Susan Storm. She does not go by her maiden name. She is proud to wear her husband's name, and this has been true back from the Lee and Kirby days. And later on, just recently, this is like last week or the week before, in Fantastic Four 2008 which started in 2018, written by, I think it's Dan Slott. She says, "You do not Richards me, Psycho Man. I go by my maiden name. Say it." And so he says, "Curse you, Storm. That's better." When did that happen? I mean, was that something that they basically retconned out when the universe got rebooted with Secret Wars? I mean, somebody tell me that. But it's kind of amazing some of the stuff that they decide is not appropriate. I mean, since when was a husband or a wife taking her husband's last name not appropriate in this particular day and age? I kind of find this a little bit disgusting, and they shouldn't have changed this. Now, let's go to John Byrne's next foray with sex, and this is specifically teen sex. And this is a subject he explored extensively in John Byrne's Next Men, in which, in the Zero issue, the girl here, the young girl Jazz, is basically having sex in a dreamlike simulation that has been provided for them by the project that has created them. And it's actually their exertions which cause the guy to exert his full strength and break the simulation that they're in, which later releases them out into the real world. So you basically have some teen copulation going on in John Byrne's Next Men. Now, these kids are somewhere between the ages of 16 and 18, all of them. So I'm not exactly sure what age this young girl Jasmine is supposed to be like, but she also engages in coitus with this other guy Nathan while they are imprisoned, and this is where they're kind of clutching at each other in desperation, scared that they're going to die. And later on, they wind up taking their clothes off and just going at it because they're just so terrified. I mean, what else are you going to do? Actually, she was feeling a little bit deprived from the fact that in the real world, Jack's strength is so much that he can't really trust himself to touch her without accidentally killing her. And so, being sex deprived and in a moment of weakness, she decides to, you know, hit up Nathan, who is willing to provide himself as well because Nathan's partner is Bethany, and Bethany has invulnerability, which has caused a loss of feeling in her skin and also makes her dangerous in terms of the sharpness of her hair and nails, and basically makes her a danger as well. So we've got a lot of, basically, I'm trying to say in John Byrne's Next Men, we got a lot of teen boinking going on, and even the youngest member, the 16-year-old Danny, gets in on the action in John Byrne's Next Men number 15. In this case, he is talking with a woman named Sandy, and we can't really tell at first how old Sandy is. She kind of looks older. I kind of felt like when I was watching this that she was really kind of a Mrs. Robinson type, but she's basically teasing him about the fact that he does not know anything about sex. He was in a simulation for his first 16 years and did not have a partner to pair off with the way that Nathan and Bethany or Jack and Jasmine did, and therefore he has no idea what sex is. And she's basically saying, "Oh, you know, you're not just a superhero; you're also a virgin." And she decides to basically take advantage of that fact. And then later on, it's revealed that she's 18 and he's 16, but still, in the state that they're in, apparently, the age of consent is higher than 16, and therefore what they did was actually illegal. And she has to explain this to him, or else he might spill the beans and then tell somebody about it, and she'll wind up going to jail. So already we've got a little bit of a progression here in John Byrne's work, where he goes to, you know, normal married sex, and then the kind of auspicious beginnings of the relationship between Reed and Sue, and now we're going into flat out teen boinking in Next Men, to illegal teen boinking in Next Men. And then we come to one of John Byrne's more familiar works called Generations. Superman and Batman Generations, an imaginary tale, basically takes the idea of what if Superman and Batman first came on the scene in 1939, and then instead of the timeline updating itself around them, they basically stayed embedded in the timeline so that Superman and Batman would both age naturally and normally. Well, at least Batman would. Superman, being a Kryptonian, would age a bit slower than anybody else. And they would basically live through the decades as themselves and grow old and pass the torch to their children and so on and so forth. So that was an interesting series. Wow, I really should have drank some more water before I started this. Excuse me a second. Now, Generations spun off into Generations 2, in which he told some stories about some of the other heroes that inhabited this imaginary world that he had created around these naturally aging Superman and Batman characters. And this carried over finally into Generations 3, in which he started hopping forward century by century and showing how the DC universe progressed every 100 years. Very, very interesting series. But when you get to Superman and Batman Generations 3, number 11, you could start getting into some sketchy territory again, because here what you have is a 14-year-old Lana Lang and a 14-year-old Lois Lane encountering a Superman museum in the far future and finding out that Superman married Lois Lane. Now, Lana Lang, of course, has been Superman's best friend in Smallville during his time as Clark Kent there and as Superboy. And she's basically going to be disappointed as hell to find out that he's actually going to marry Lois instead. So when it comes time to return Lana and Lois to their time and also wipe their memories of the fact that they know that he's Superman now, Lana makes a request and she says, I want a real kiss just once before you go. At which point Superman protests, Lana, you're only 14 years old. Remember, this is an adult Superman being asked by a 14-year-old, a minor by any stretch of the imagination, for an adult kiss. She then goes on to defend her request, saying, does that matter? No one here is going to call the cops on you, Superman or Clark. I've dreamed for years that you and I would be together someday, that we get married and have children, yada yada. Now I know that can never ever be. Is one kiss too much to ask before you send me back to all the dreams that can never come true? And Superman says it's not unreasonable, and the dude actually kisses her. And I mean an adult kiss. Old Superman, 14-year-old Lana Lang. At which point, Saturn Girl steps in and says, I put a temporary mental lock on them. I thought that might be the appropriate time to do it. And Batman then says, okay, it's time that we moved on to the next step, and I'll sneak Lois back to her dad. But oh my gosh, are you serious? Are you serious that you just had Clark Kent, an adult Clark Kent, kissing a 14-year-old Lana Lang, even after acknowledging that this was an illegal act? Okay. You see, what really boggles my mind is the fact that this not only was submitted by John Byrne to DC Comics, but it also made it past the editors at DC Comics. The editors had to see this scene and think, what the hell's going on here? Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they just allowed this scene right through. Maybe this is not something that disturbed their sensibilities. Now, I just wondered to myself, okay, if I were somebody who were going to insert material this sketchy into one of my comic books, I would probably want to make it so that in the case the editors rejected it, it would be very, very easy to reject it and the story would flow even if this particular scene was rejected. And so I took a look at the at the 3 pages altogether. And here are the 3 pages. First, you see Lana Lang making her request of Superman. He decides to grant her request, and then it's off to the races because they need to get the main story back in motion. Now, what if you got rid of that center page? If you poof that center page out of existence, then you come up with this, where she makes the request of him, and then immediately Saturn Girl places a mental lock on anyone. It's actually quite funny to look at, saying, Lana, you're only 14 years old. And then Saturn Girl says, I put a temporary mental lock on them, Cal. I thought that might be the appropriate time to do it. So basically, if you took out that middle page, you actually still have a naturally flowing story point in which he's basically like, what the hell are you talking about? You're only 14. And then Saturn Girl is like, yep, I'm just going to shut everybody down and let's get back to business. So that could have actually happened, I think. And I wondered if John Byrne had purposely drawn those 3 pages that way. Now, I did have the opportunity to ask him the question in a more generic sense at our Comic-Con in Texas. I basically said, have you ever drawn a sequence where you didn't know whether or not what you were drawing was going to make it past the editors, and so you gave them an easy way out so that they could drop the page if need be? Now, he says no. So in his mind, unless he's forgotten, unless he actually never intended that way, possibly, he never intended it to those 3 pages to flow in such a way that you could drop the middle page and we'd be none the wiser. Now, I do want to remind you of number 5, coincidences do happen. It could totally be a coincidence that if you look at the way the pages flow and the fact that you can drop that middle page without interrupting the flow of the story, It could totally be a coincidence. Absolutely. It could absolutely be a coincidence. And I don't want anybody to think that, either Byrne was lying or that he'd forgotten or, maybe he was trying to hide this or something like that. I don't want anybody to think that because it could just be a coincidence. And again, when in doubt, assume the best of intentions. In fact, go and read all these preconditions again because I think that's very important. My point here in making this particular video is not to cast aspersions on John Byrne. John Byrne, again, is one of my favorite writers and artists in all of comic book history, and I think that his work is very well is to be very well received, and even his Generations books are good books. I mean, minus the one sketchy scene. So I'm not saying that you should ever avoid his work. I'm not saying that you should, try and keep anybody else from reading his work because his work is good and it deserves to be read and it deserves to be appreciated as it is. What I want to get across to you is the fact that we all look to comic books as being safe material for our kids, thinking that, okay, yeah, we know that we've got a lot of LGBTQ stuff that have been creeping into comics for quite some time now. But at least they've never gone so far as to have a superhero, a major superhero from one of the big two, engage in actual illegal conduct with a minor. We've never had the comic book companies stoop that far, have we? Yes, as a matter of fact, we have. Now, granted, it's not canonical Superman stuff, it's just Superman in an imaginary story. But at the same time, that's kind of bad enough, and it kind of makes you realize that this not only made it onto the page because of a writer and artist's work, but also because the editors let it through. And if they are the kind of people who are going to let that through, what else are they going to let that through? What else are they going to allow on the page that's going to end up in front of your kids' eyes? And so my message to you who are watching this video is don't just blindly trust the comic book companies to have your kids' best interests at heart. We thought, we're looking at things now and seeing that and thinking that there's a slippery slope in progress, that you're seeing all of this LGBT stuff being force-fed into comics and being force-fed to your children through the comics, and thinking, well, at least they haven't gone so far as to actually explore illegal behavior. But they have already. This has already taken place. And it could just as easily take place again in next month's issue of Batman, of Superman, of Thor, of Spider-Man, of Hulk, of whoever. You don't know. You need to be monitoring, as a parent, the literature that you are putting in front of your kid's face. Don't just buy something off the rack and think, well, this didn't mess me up. Comics today are not what they were. Thank you for watching this latest installment of the Creeping Rainbow in Comics. I'm Mike Partika, and please do subscribe to get more content from this and my other playlists and for my other one-off videos, and I will talk to you later.